never imagined that opening an envelope could change the course of my life so completely. When I saw the official letter from the attorney, my hands shook, and my heart raced in a way I hadn't felt in years. $13 million. The number seemed impossibly large, almost unreal, like it belonged in a dream I wasn't meant to touch. I read it over and over, each time letting the weight of it sink in. My mind immediately flooded with visions of what life could be. A house with sprawling gardens, a wardrobe that didn't consist solely of hand-me-downs, the freedom to travel anywhere without counting every penny. For the first time in a long while, I felt secure. I imagined candlelit dinners, weekends on yachts, trips to Paris I'd only ever seen in glossy magazines. And yet, as the thrill coursed through me, I felt a faint, prickling awareness. He was watching me with something like curiosity, but there was an edge there, a shadow behind his smile. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I sensed it. My husband's eyes lingered on the papers longer than necessary, a tightness around his jaw betraying something I couldn't yet name. Gratitude battled uneasily with a flicker of tension I couldn't ignore. Could he truly be happy for me? Or was there something darker stirring beneath the surface, a storm waiting to erupt behind the polite congratulations? The day I inherited that fortune felt like stepping into a new world, radiant and intoxicating, yet shaded by the first whispers of doubt that would soon follow me into every luxurious room I now imagined as mine. The first week after the inheritance felt surreal, like stepping into a life I had only glimpsed in magazines or on television. We toured mansions with high ceilings and gleaming marble floors, each room larger than my entire previous apartment. Luxury cars lined the driveway, their polished surfaces reflecting the bright sunlight as if mocking the ordinary life I'd left behind. At social gatherings, I noticed the way people's eyes lingered a little longer, the whispers that followed my presence, the polite envy in their smiles. At first, it was intoxicating, the sudden shift from being overlooked to being admired, desired, or envied. Yet amidst the sparkling champagne and laughter, I began to notice subtle changes in him. My husband, once easygoing and warm, had become quietly sharp, his words carrying an undercurrent I hadn't heard before. He would comment on the smallest details, as if testing my reactions, and his smiles sometimes felt forced, brittle. When I suggested donating to a charity or buying gifts for friends, there was a slight narrowing of his eyes, a faint edge in his tone, as if my generosity reminded him of what he lacked. Even in private, he questioned my choices, not overtly, but with remarks that stung and lingered. "Are you sure you need all those bags?" he asked once, a casual tone that carried judgment. "Maybe we should think about saving more for the future," he said, though the fortune was vast enough to cover decades of indulgence. The tension was subtle but undeniable, a shadow creeping into rooms that once held warmth. My excitement was tempered by unease. The glittering world I had stepped into now seemed layered with hidden currents. Every glance, every word, hinted at a jealousy I had never anticipated, a quiet contest brewing beneath the surface of our luxurious new life. I began to realize that money could illuminate not just possibilities, but cracks, revealing sides of people you never thought existed. I never expected a simple drive to the grocery store to become the catalyst that would shatter the illusion of security I had built. The accident was minor. Another car ran a red light, the screech of brakes, metal crunching. But the aftermath revealed far more than I could have anticipated. Sitting in the hospital waiting room, my body wrapped in a stiff cast and bandages, I watched my husband pace with a tightness in his shoulders, his face unreadable. At first, I tried to convince myself he was worried, that the furrowed brow and clipped movements were concern. But the truth hit me slowly, like cold water seeping in. His questions were pointed, not about my well-being, but about insurance claims, costs, and inconvenience. "Are they going to bill us for this?" he asked, voice flat. There was no warmth, no trembling worry, no soft squeeze of my hand. Instead, I felt a chilling distance, a sharp edge of indifference slicing through the supposed intimacy we shared. Even in my pain, I could sense an undercurrent of veiled threat, a subtle reminder that this fortune, and perhaps even my health, wasn't entirely safe. As doctors and nurses moved around me, he hovered with a calculated precision, noting every detail, every possibility of blame. as if the accident were a puzzle to solve rather than a person to comfort. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I realized in that stark hospital room that my husband, the man I thought I could trust, had priorities entirely separate from mine. My pulse raced not only from shock but from dawning comprehension. The luxury, the inheritance, the life I had celebrated. It had also exposed him for who he truly was. The veneer of partnership cracked, revealing cold ambition and selfish calculation beneath. That day, amid sterile walls and beeping monitors, I understood that the world I had entered with excitement was fraught with danger, and that the battle for my own life, my fortune, and my dignity had only just begun. It started with small things that I had brushed off before. An unfamiliar transaction on our joint account, a half-erased note tucked into a drawer, the way his phone would buzz constantly, and he'd hastily shove it into his pocket. At first I told myself I was imagining it, letting paranoia creep in like fog, but the unease refused to dissipate. Late at night, I found myself replaying conversations in my mind, noticing the subtle digs, the way he minimized my achievements, the casual remarks that now seemed carefully calculated. I remembered moments I had previously dismissed as quirks, the way he questioned my memory of events, how he hinted I was being forgetful or careless, and the way he praised others lavishly while quietly undermining me. Flashbacks surged unbidden, a montage of manipulation and emotional cruelty I had failed to see in real time. Each recollection added weight to the suspicions that were now impossible to ignore. My mind raced constantly, connecting dots that had been scattered across months, even years. Was the inheritance the trigger he had been waiting for? Or had this been simmering beneath the surface all along? Anxiety coiled in my stomach, tight and relentless, as I realized that trust, once the foundation of our marriage, was now a fragile thread I could no longer rely on. Every call he received, every whispered conversation I caught the tail end of, became a potential clue, each one amplifying my dread and sharpening my resolve. In the quiet hours, I couldn't escape the growing certainty. The man I had loved might not be who I thought he was, and the life we were building together could be a facade hiding something far more dangerous. The stakes were no longer just about wealth. They were about truth, control, and the very reality of the life I thought I knew. I finally couldn't hold it in any longer. That evening, as he lounged casually on the couch scrolling through his phone, I closed the door behind me and let the silence stretch for a moment, gathering every ounce of courage I had. "We need to talk," I said, voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. His head tilted, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "About what?" he asked, casual, almost mocking. I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to crumble. "Don't play innocent. The financial inconsistencies, the hidden messages, your secret calls. Don't pretend you don't know what I mean." His smile widened, a predator's grin. "I don't know what you're imagining. Maybe you're overreacting. You've always been a little too sensitive." My pulse quickened, the familiar feeling of gaslighting settling in. But this time I refused to be quiet. "Overreacting? You've been hiding things, manipulating, lying. I can see it now. Do you think I won't notice?" He leaned back, shaking his head, mock pity in his eyes. "Notice? You notice, but you don't understand. You're making connections where none exist. Honestly, it's exhausting dealing with your paranoia." I felt a wave of anger and disbelief, but also a spark of clarity. Every dismissive word, every belittling remark, was proof of his arrogance and deceit. The man I thought I knew, the partner I trusted, was revealed in sharp relief. A man who saw my love and loyalty as weakness. I stood there, trembling, a mix of fury and determination coiling inside me. "No more lies," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I see you now, all of you, and I'm done pretending everything's fine." He scoffed, unconcerned, confident that I would crumble under the weight of accusation. But the confrontation had the opposite effect. Every word he used to belittle me fueled my resolve, sharpening my focus, clarifying what I had to do next. I was no longer just the shocked wife. I was a woman awake, aware, and quietly preparing to reclaim everything that had been manipulated, hidden, or stolen. After the confrontation, I felt hollow, as if the ground beneath me had shifted, and I was teetering on the edge of a chasm I hadn't even seen. Heartbreak gnawed at me, each memory of his cold indifference replaying in my mind like a relentless film. I questioned myself endlessly. Had I missed the warning signs all along? The subtle manipulations, the quiet dismissals, the little comments that once seemed harmless now gleamed like red flags I had ignored. I thought of all the sacrifices I'd made for him, the times I bent myself into shapes that suited his comfort, only to be met with disregard or criticism. Self-doubt weighed heavily. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and almost foolish for having trusted him so completely. Yet amidst the shadow of despair, small sparks of support flickered. Friends who had silently noticed his cruelty reached out with quiet concern, sharing anecdotes of similar behavior, or gently reminding me that none of this was my fault. A sister's text simply reading, "You deserve better." Or a friend recounting the subtle ways he had belittled me in front of others, reminded me that empathy still existed outside my fractured marriage. Their understanding created a fragile sense of validation, like a lifeline I could grasp in the storm of confusion. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel not just hurt, but seen. To recognize that my feelings were valid, and that the betrayal I experienced was real. The heartbreak lingered, but within it, a quiet ember of resilience began to glow, hinting that while the pain was mine, I was not alone. I realized that anger alone wouldn't protect me. I needed strategy, evidence, and clarity. Quietly, I began documenting everything. Every lie, every subtle manipulation, every moment he tried to rewrite reality. I made detailed notes of conversations, dates, and hidden transactions, storing them where he would never think to look. Each small discovery stoked my determination, turning confusion and fear into a calculated focus. I started researching legal and financial avenues, learning what rights I had over our assets, the inheritance, and my own security. The more I uncovered, the more I saw the pattern of control he had woven around me, and the more I realized how much power I could reclaim. Meanwhile, his arrogance grew. He strutted through our home with a confidence that was almost comical, unaware that I was quietly preparing to undo him. He laughed at little inconveniences, dismissing my concerns as trivial, while I silently cataloged each instance, knowing that these moments would become critical pieces in the plan I was assembling. Every boast, every smirk, every subtle attempt to assert dominance became a stepping stone toward exposing him. I felt a thrill, a sharp and empowering anticipation, that for the first time I was no longer merely reacting to his actions. I was orchestrating the path that would eventually bring justice, and the knowledge that he could not see it coming gave me a quiet satisfaction I had never experienced before. At first, the changes were so small he didn't even notice. I began with the finances, transferring certain accounts into my name, revisiting legal documents he'd always handled, and quietly rerouting correspondence. When he questioned me, I smiled sweetly and said I was just getting organized. The confidence in my tone disarmed him. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. That moment tasted like victory. I stopped asking for permission, whether it was hosting a charity dinner or buying something extravagant. I bought a car he'd once mocked me for wanting, purely because I could. I began attending social events without him, dressed elegantly, composed and radiant. People started to see me, not as the quiet wife behind a smug husband, but as a woman of her own standing. Every handshake, every compliment, every admiring glance reinforced a truth I'd nearly forgotten. I had power, real, undeniable power. He started losing control of the narrative. When mutual friends reached out to me directly, when business associates began treating me as the one with authority, his temper simmered beneath the surface. He'd make veiled comments about my new attitude, his jaw tightening whenever I dismissed his opinions. Yet, I didn't raise my voice or argue. I learned that silence unsettled him more than confrontation. At night, I'd lie awake, recalling all the times I had walked on eggshells for his comfort. Now the floor belonged to me. My movements were deliberate, my words chosen carefully, each gesture a subtle reminder that he had underestimated me from the start. He thought my compliance had been weakness, but it was observation. Every day I regained something he'd taken: confidence, peace, control. I could sense the balance shifting, the foundation beneath him beginning to crack. He didn't know it yet, but I was setting the stage for his fall. My revenge wouldn't come from rage or chaos, it would come from precision. And he would never see the moment it all turned against him until it was far too late. It started with a signature, one small misplaced line on a document I hadn't signed. My lawyer noticed it first, a subtle inconsistency in a financial report connected to one of my trust accounts. I felt my stomach twist as the truth began to unfurl like a slow, poisonous vine. He had been trying to divert part of my inheritance into a shell account under his control. My heart raced, not just from shock, but from an eerie calm that settled over me. I finally had something tangible. Proof. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I waited. I wanted witnesses. The kind of setting where his mask couldn't hold. That chance arrived a week later during a gathering at our home. A small evening event filled with lawyers, investors, and family friends. He loved these nights, the ones where he could bask in attention, painting himself as the charming, devoted husband beside his lucky wife. As he spoke to one of our guests, bragging about how we managed the estate together, my lawyer quietly arrived. I had arranged it that way. The timing had to be perfect. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my face remained calm, even gracious. When my lawyer handed me the file, I opened it slowly, almost ceremonially, and placed it on the table between us. His laughter faltered as I asked softly, "Would you like to explain why your signature appears on documents authorizing transfers from my personal inheritance?" The silence that followed was electric. His expression froze, caught between arrogance and fear. Guests turned, murmuring. He stammered something about a clerical mix-up, but I didn't let him recover. My voice was steady, clear, and deliberate. "A mix-up that sends 7 figures into a hidden account with your name on it?" I let the question hang in the air like a blade, his face drained of color. I saw the exact moment realization struck. He wasn't in control anymore. The room, once his stage, now belonged entirely to me. The very people he had impressed for years were watching him unravel. Someone whispered his name. Someone else muttered, "Unbelievable." For years he'd toyed with my emotions in private, hidden his cruelty behind charm. But now his downfall was public, irreversible, humiliating. I watched him struggle to form excuses, his voice trembling, eyes darting for sympathy that wasn't there. The man who once prided himself on power and image was suddenly reduced to nothing but panic. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to gloat. I simply closed the file, thanked my lawyer, and turned to the guests. "Thank you all for coming," I said with calm authority. "This will be the last event we host together." The room fell silent. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. As I walked away, I could feel every eye on me, not with pity but admiration. The woman he'd tried to silence had just destroyed him with grace. The karma was exquisite. Everything he had used to elevate himself, money, connections, reputation, had become the stage for his own humiliation. And as I stepped outside into the night air, I felt light, almost free. For the first time in years, I was no longer under his shadow. He thought he could manipulate my fortune, my life, my name. But he forgot one thing. When you underestimate someone long enough, eventually, they learn how to strike back. The days after the social unmasking were electric with tension. I had carefully gathered every piece of evidence, emails, texts, transaction records, and witness statements detailing not just his financial sabotage, but years of manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional abuse. I didn't rush. I knew timing was everything. The opportunity came during a formal family gathering, one of those ostentatious charity dinners he loved, surrounded by the very people whose admiration he craved. He strutted in, self-assured, still convinced he controlled the narrative. I arrived with a quiet confidence, holding a folder that seemed innocuous to anyone else, but inside it contained the truth that would unravel everything he had built. As dinner progressed, I let subtle hints slip into casual conversation, exposing inconsistencies in his past statements, discrepancies in his accounts, and the small betrayals he thought I hadn't noticed. Guests exchanged glances, whispers spreading like wildfire across the grand hall. Finally, I stood, letting the room fall silent. "I think it's time we all understood the truth," I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of every slight he had ever inflicted. I presented the documentation systematically, the hidden transfers, his attempts to control my inheritance, the years of belittling remarks, the subtle ways he undermined me in social and professional circles. The reactions around the table were immediate. Shocked gasps, murmurs of disbelief, and then the unmistakable tinge of moral outrage. He stammered, tried to justify, tried to charm his way out, but the evidence was irrefutable. The guests who once hung on his every word now looked at him with incredulity, seeing him for the first time as the manipulative, selfish man he truly was. My friends and family, who had silently suspected for years, now nodded subtly, validating the story that had haunted me. Each moment of his flailing, each defensive argument, each attempt to shift blame only intensified the humiliation. By the time I finished presenting the evidence, he was visibly shaken, his carefully curated image shattered, his arrogance replaced with panic. He realized too late that no charm or excuse could save him. He had underestimated me for years, and now the world could see exactly who he was. I could feel the collective judgment of everyone in that room, a tidal wave of recognition and vindication that left him gasping for control he no longer possessed. When the last paper was laid on the table, I took a breath, feeling the culmination of months of planning, observation, and restraint. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply said, "This is everything." The weight of his betrayal now fully exposed, the man who had attempted to dominate my life, my fortune, and my spirit was powerless, humiliated before everyone who mattered. I watched him shrink under the scrutiny, and in that moment, I felt an unexpected serenity, a calm that comes from finally reclaiming your life. I had been wronged, yes, but I had risen, strategically and gracefully, to ensure that justice was not only served but witnessed. The room, once a stage for his ego, had become a testament to his defeat, and mine. The relief was immediate and intoxicating. With the evidence exposed and his lies laid bare, I reclaimed full control over my fortune, every account and asset now securely in my name. It wasn't just money. It was autonomy, proof that I could protect myself and shape my own life without relying on someone who had betrayed me. Each decision I made, from investments to personal indulgences, felt like a small victory, a declaration that I would no longer be underestimated or manipulated. Socially, the shift was equally profound. Friends, family, and colleagues who had witnessed the confrontation treated me differently, not out of pity, but out of respect. They saw strength, resilience, and intelligence, the qualities my husband had tried to overshadow. I started making plans for my future on my own terms, feeling a freedom I had never experienced. Nights were quieter, yes, but filled with a sense of triumph that resonated deeper than any applause could. In private moments, I reflected on the journey, the heartbreak, the doubt, the subtle manipulations, and realized how far I had come. Empowerment wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, unwavering, and deeply satisfying. I had not only survived betrayal but had emerged stronger, smarter, and undeniably in control. For the first time in years, I felt completely whole, unburdened by deceit, and free to embrace the life I deserved. Sitting alone in the quiet of my new home, I finally allowed myself to breathe and think. The storm of betrayal, anger, and fear had passed, leaving a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I reflected on every lesson learned, the importance of trusting my instincts, the power of observation, and the value of self-reliance. Painful as it had been, the journey forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself and those I loved. I recognized the subtle ways I had allowed others to define my worth, and the courage it took to reclaim it. There was, of course, a bittersweet ache for the love I thought I had, the life I had imagined with someone I believed would always be there. Yet that loss was tempered by the profound growth I now carried, the confidence, the resilience, and the knowledge that I could survive betrayal without losing myself. For the first time, I felt a deep, unwavering sense of self-respect and peace. I was no longer just a participant in my story. I had become the author, shaping my own destiny with wisdom, strength, and clarity. Months later, life had settled into a rhythm I had only dreamed of. I spent mornings enjoying quiet moments in my sunlit kitchen, evenings hosting friends who respected me for who I truly was, and weekends pursuing passions that had long been shelved. My relationships were now built on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine affection. A stark contrast to the manipulation and deceit I had endured. I traveled, invested, and gave generously, but each decision was mine alone, free from fear or coercion. Occasionally, memories of the past flickered, but instead of pain, they served as reminders of how far I had come. I had learned to trust myself, to set boundaries, and to embrace joy without guilt. For the first time, happiness felt earned, secure, and sustainable. Looking toward the future, I felt empowered, confident, and hopeful, knowing I could navigate life's challenges with strength and grace. My story, once defined by betrayal, was now defined by resilience, self-respect, and the quiet triumph of reclaiming my life.